Canada is a better country than the United States. There's no such thing as a good country in this world. There are some better than others, and Canada is clearly better than the United States. And by that I mean better for more people more of the time. The only points I would give to the US is that if you are an entrepreneur and you want to make big money, you're probably better off most of the time in the United States. However, I think to me where it counts in terms of human values, Canada ranks well ahead. To begin with, the National Health Service is the most obvious point. And if I may make just a personal anecdote, having lived here for many, many years, when I had flesh-eating disease, I was hospitalized for 47 days and absolutely free. And then, when I was sent home, I had nurses coming to my home. You can't get anything like that in the United States without going bankrupt, unless your name is Elon Musk. Lower tuition fees at universities. Canadians complain, and rightly so, that their tuition fees are much too high. They are, but compared to the United States, they are cheap. In the United States, it's incredible that anybody, other than the very rich, can help their children go to universities. Both countries are capitalist countries, yes, and in our system, the only way to really protest your conditions, unfortunately, is sometimes to strike. Canada has stronger labor unions, and a higher percentage of workers are engaged in labor unions. And also, although both countries are terribly, terribly skewed in terms of the distribution of wealth, as so much for the rich and so much less for the rest of us, Canada has a slightly less skewed distribution of wealth than the United States. You go from US to Canada and the crime rate drops enormously. I don't know the exact figures, but the murder rate is something like barely a quarter of what it is in the United States. And you don't have too many of those school shootings. You don't have to fear going bankrupt because you need medical expenses. And obviously there's crime in Canada, but you have much less to fear than the US. And generally, children have much, much less to fear. Politically, let's look. Both countries claim to be democracies. Neither one is. To begin with, Canada has this incredible, inherited from the British, voting system of first past the post, which means that if I get 40% and my brother gets 30%, my sister gets 30%, I'm automatically elected, even if my brother and sister are ideologically closer to each other, which means that our electoral system is very, very distorted in terms of who gets the seats and who doesn't, because it's not based on actual popular vote and any form of proportional representation. But that's nothing compared to the United States, where in 4 times in American history, the losing candidate has been elected, inverted commas, president. Every state has a separate rule for voting, which is absolutely insane. At least in Canada, voting is uniform across the provinces and territories. And then there is the question of gerrymandering in the U.S. As some of you may know, at the moment, the Republicans have gerrymandered in Ohio, in North Carolina, in Texas, God knows where else. And so Gavin Newsom, governor of California, deliberately set up a referendum which passed that California should also gerrymander. And why not? There's no use playing the game fairly when your adversary is not. Sometimes you have to fight fire with a different kind of fire. And then there are more things. There's slightly more paid vacation in Canada, a more generous parental leave. Not that any of these things are great in Canada, but what I'm talking about today is comparing Canada to the overinflated, in people's minds, United States during the pandemic. Certainly, in fact, Canada made international headlines with its so-called freedom convoy, read fascist convoy, and there was no exactly similar thing in the United States, but Canadians were far less in number, in percentage, as anti-vaxxers. And finally, I want to sum up all of these things I'm saying indicate a somewhat more cooperative, collective spirit which better ensures individuality, because the United States put this emphasis on individualism. What kind of individualism do you have if you're bankrupt because of medicine, a cost of medicine? What kind of individualism do you have if you as a parent or you as a child can't get into university, or at least the university of your choice, because it's so damned expensive? The American individualism, which is that the day-to-day freedom of most people is pretty limited. And when the right wing, here as well as in the U.S., talks about freedom, they're talking about their freedom individually. They're not looking at the collective situation. You know, having a right to vote and having a right to free speech, and even that is risky sometimes. I don't know how many working people would open free speech if they knew that they could be fired. All of these things are slightly less worse in Canada. I'm not saying Canada is a paradise, far from it. There's no country that is really what I would call a good country. There are some that are better. There is a saying, Canadians will go to the United States because they want to make more money. Americans will move to Canada because they want a better quality of life. And as far as I'm concerned, of course, you have to have some money to have quality of life, no question about that. And perhaps Americans have more purchasing power. I think that's probably true on a day-to-day basis. But there's enough purchasing power for most Canadians to have a better quality of life for the reasons I've described. Less criminality and less fear of it, lower tuition fees, national health service, stronger labor unions. And so in sum, taken for most people, more of the time, Canada is clearly a superior country to the United States.